erasing your tracks. Now, when it comes to the final step here, what you want to do is to erase your tracks. You don't want there to be any trace that you were there. One of the things that we'll cover here is the issue of using snort. Now, snort doesn't actually erase your tracks, but it does keep track of what other people are doing on a system. So you need to use snort to both protect your own systems, and you need to use snort so that you can identify what kinds of thing it does, how the rules are configured, and things of this nature, so that you can help to sneak your way around it on other people's networks. And snort's a very popular IDS utility. There's also IDS Central, which is a companion to snort, works within Windows, and it allows you to have a graphical user interface to configure snort, which would otherwise be a command line only for Linux and Windows. There's also clearing logs. We've got to get rid of that incriminating evidence. I mean, that spells it out right there. So-and-so was here and they deleted this file, or they manipulated this, or they did something they weren't supposed to. So clear the log files, and also get rid of any files that are left over, any logs that your own utilities have created, or any files that are left over like hackers files or Trojans or viruses or something like that. All right, in this last nugget in our series, we want to make sure that a couple things happen. Number one, we want to have some kind of a system in place so that we can keep track of what kind of traffic is coming our way and what's going on in the network. That'll allow us to identify something that looks suspicious on our own so that we can see if we're getting hacked. And number two, we also want to keep track of anything that we do on remote systems where we're the hackers. We want to make sure that we delete any trace of our activity there, or we also want to make sure that we can always get back in and leave a back door for ourselves in case we need to re-access that system at a future point in time. And a lot of hackers will have just kind of a mental list of a number of different systems throughout the globe that have back doors on them that they can always go to if they need to set up a new base of operations. Now, first thing we're going to do is get started with snort. And we're not going to really spend a lot of time there because there are quite a few books out there that have been written on snort. They're hundreds of pages long, and it's a very complex tool if you want it to be. You can really kind of make it as simple or as complex as you want it to be. It depends upon your network situation. If you're someone that works for a small company, you can probably set up some simple rules using what we call the snort.conf file, snort.conf file. It's really just a plain text file, but man, it's got to have hundreds of lines in it, a lot of which are remarked out, but you can remove the remark symbol, which is the pound symbol, and make any changes you need to. If you want to confirm that snort is running properly, if it's just going to be running in a logging mode, for example, just do a snort -v, and it keeps track of what's going on. And then if I open up another command prompt here, for example, then I can just go ahead and identify network traffic that goes on to that. For example, I might, ping 10.10.10.46, or I might just ping a host by name, DC1, if it can get one of those. Okay, so it's resolving a name. I'm just doing something here. Now we see here that it had done an ARP request there, and it's kind of scrolling by the screen, so I can't quite see it, but we saw that it had done an ARP request. When I ping something by name, it needs to be able to find that name. So in any case, when you're done with this, you can Control-C to close it. If there are any alerts or anything important that took place, you can keep track of that as well. You can log snort, and you can output snort into database files to make it easier to analyze the information later on. In any case, what you can use snort for is that type of thing, and you can set up certain rules for it as well, so that it has the ability to send an alert to you if it sees port on, for example, 31337. This is a popular port that's often used by back orifice. That's the port that back orifice typically uses. Now, also for Windows hosts, I recommend that you download the snort version that works with Windows. Now, even though it's a Win32 program, it's still a command line program, even within Windows XP here, for example. However, there's an accompanying piece you can get with this called IDS Center 1.1 is the current version. And what this does is it's a very handy way of working with snort. I like this a lot because reading that snort.conf file can make you go blind after a while. One of the 2 or 3 things that can make you go blind, right? So anyway, what we can do with this is to identify the executable. That's very simple there. You can identify the process priority. You do have to have, by the way, and I didn't mention this before, you do have to have promiscuous network sniffer running, so WinPCAP or PCAP, because again, of course, it needs to identify the traffic going back and forth across the network. So you just configure the various options. There's dozens, if not a couple hundred different checkboxes and radio buttons and all that kind of thing to identify here. So I won't exhaust this, but you get the idea. Have to have a location for logging and your alerts. You also can configure your snort options here. This is where we actually are working with the snort.conf file. This is the file I mentioned earlier. Now, really, initially, nothing appears here, so you have to click on the little button over here and to find the snort.conf file, and then once you've done that, you can go down through here and identify different stuff. For example, one of the things that you'll often see in the documentation is that there's a variable for your home network. They want to know what your local subnet is, or your home network range is, and you can enter in multiple subnets here if you want to. And you can see that here I've just entered in my network. You can also identify external networks as any, and that would mean anything besides what I've typed in the line up above. And then you can identify that you want to look for anything that takes place on port 80. There's all different kinds of rules down through here. These are mostly explanatory comments, and they're very good. It's very easy to read, and they give you pretty much all the information that you're going to need to have. But you can also go down here to the wizards, and you can enter in various network variables here. For example, this is really just picking information out of that conf log, that snort.conf log, and we can go in here, we can delete or edit these variables to set up certain kinds of rules to flag certain kinds of traffic. Now, Snort, one of the things that's really good about Snort is that it's free. It's been just compiled by a few different guys that have really done a good job of updating it, and there's also a Snort community that does a good job of keeping people up to date on what's going on with Snort as well, and that continues to write new rules for it to keep track of whatever the latest worm or virus and all that kind of stuff is. Now, when it comes to covering your tracks, you want to make sure that after you've done the dirty deeds that you're going to do on a computer, that nobody can identify that you were there. Or even if they can identify some little fragments of information, that it doesn't get really traced back directly to you. Now, how do we do that? Well, this is where certified ethical hackers and black hat hackers have a little bit of a difference in the way we operate. You see, we have to have a contract to be able to hack into a computer legally. However, that's our get out of jail free card. However, a black hat will compromise 3, 5, 10 machines in any part of the globe perhaps, and they'll launch their attacks from those machines. Now, obviously, as a certified ethical hacker, I don't have permission to hack on those machines. Those could be machines at EDUs or people's home PCs or something like that. So that's outside of the scope of my contract. So we don't really have a direct one-to-one correlation in where we hack there. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But a hacker would then keep those machines open. He'd probably put some kind of a backdoor in there, some kind of a rootkit that he or she can continue to use at any time that they feel necessary, and to launch their attacks from there. In our situation, however, we need to do something else, and that is to clear the logs. Now, if you're in Windows, if you just right-click on my computer here, and this is true of all current versions of Windows, then if you right-click on it and choose Manage, then you'll see that there's an option here for the event viewer, or something in the console for event viewer. And there's a security log where it identifies a number of different things. It might identify, a brute force attack, for example, against a password would give you a failure audit, like these little closed lock items here. This would be, for example, where someone might have entered in the incorrect password over and over and over again. Well, that would have filled up this event log. So that's one thing to look for. Then if there's 12 different attempts, failed attempts, and there's a successful attempt against the administrator account, that might look suspicious because it looks like, somebody was using some kind of a password cracker against us and they finally got the password. So what we want to do is to clear that. Now, if you have access to this event log, one thing you could do is to simply right-click on the event log, whichever one, and each one of these could actually potentially have information in it that would be incriminating. And mine's full of all kinds of stuff right now because I've been hacking against it for this whole course, so it's chock full of junk. So what I would want to do is, of course, to right-click here, clear all events. Maybe there's in the system log, there's something that could incriminate me. So I'll clear all the events. Do you want to save it first? No. I'm trying to get rid of all traces of it. Well, now it's cleared. But also notice that when I go back to the security event log, that will identify that somebody did indeed make a change. So if I double click on this last event log, for example, then it will say that privilege account management was used, and I did something that in this case was to clear the event log. So there's identifying information wherever you go here. Now, other things we could do would be to use utilities for this instead. And you might want to especially do that here because, like, look, if I right-click on the security log and I choose to clear all these events, do you want to save the security log before clearing it? No. Now, here's the big thing. Clearing the event log creates an event log, and it identifies who it was that cleared that event log, as we can see here. The username was trainer, and the domain name was, and that's just the name of this computer in this case, was client1. So it identifies me as being the person that cleared this event log the last time. Then there's a couple of utilities you can use as well. One of those is clearlogs.exe. Now, I've been having a hard time finding a clear version of that file, a clean version, because there's a lot of them out there on the internet that are just chock full of viruses. In fact, the last one, I tried to download Semantic's Norton's antivirus, caught that as having another virus embedded inside of it. So, haven't had much luck with clearlogs.exe. I used to have it, I lost it, now I can't find one that doesn't have a virus in it anymore. Another one that's popular is something called WinZapper, WinZapper. WinZapper. The only thing about WinZapper is it also leaves behind a file called dummy.dat when you're done using the tool. So make sure that when you have run WinZapper.exe that you also delete dummy.dat, otherwise it's a dead giveaway that someone's run WinZapper. You may also want to, on your Linux systems, stop the log files from being created because perhaps you want to do some dirty deeds, but you don't want to be logged doing them. So you want to stop the syslog daemon, and what you'll do there is simply go to a command terminal, or a terminal window here, and then you need to identify the process that the syslog daemon's running on. So you do a PS capital A, and you've seen me do this before, but we'll just grep for it, and we're looking for a syslog daemon. And that's running on 1502. That's the process ID. So we'll do a kill, and then we can just do syslog daemon, or actually 1502, to identify the process. And now we'll do a PSA again to see if that item is running, and no, it's no longer running, so we've successfully killed the syslog daemon. You'd also need to kill the kernel logging daemon, so you would, again, this time we'll just do a kernel logging daemon, and that's going to be klogd, and press enter. It's on 1506. So we'll kill that one too, 1506, and then we'll do a PSA grep again, see if we can find it. That has also been killed. Now the next thing I would do then is I would just start scavenging the system to look for log files. By the way, those will frequently be found in, and I guess I can just go there to show you as well, it will frequently be found in var log. And if we ls that, there's a whole bunch of log files right there, and I would just want to start going through and selectively deleting the ones that might incriminate me. Now, another thing you should consider is using the shred command that's available in Linux. So, for example, maybe I've got something that's incriminating to me in, I don't know, let's just pick a file, boot.log.1. So let's just do a more of that file, boot.log.1, and we'll see that we got, there's stuff in there. Maybe we added a driver, a kernel driver that we shouldn't have been, a little loadable kernel module that we shouldn't have done here. Well, I'm going to quit that, and I'm going to try to clear all this. So let's list this data again. And now I want to use shred to delete that one log file. So I'll do shred, and then I'll do a -f and a -n10. And then I'm going to do a -v and a -z, and then the name of the file, boot.log.1. All right, let's go ahead and explain what these different options mean. The F is to force, right here. The N is number of times, so I'm specifying to overwrite the data 10 times. V for verbose, after I've written over the data 10 times. Then the -z says to also overwrite it with all zeros. That kind of hides any trace that I used shred, because a lot of shredder programs and eraser programs overwrite with random numbers and letters and stuff like that, random data, which makes it clear that it was shredded. Well, this would just overwrite it with zeros, which makes it a little bit less obvious. Now I'll go ahead and press enter here. We see that it's overwritten the data that number of times. And now let's go ahead and see if we can find any data in there. Certainly not. It is now just an empty file written with all zeros. Another thing to be careful of is that you remove any trace that you are on that computer in terms of any files that might have been left behind. Certain utilities might have created their own log files. Make sure you get rid of those. Make sure that you also delete actually any actual files that you've left behind that you want to clean up after yourself, especially if you don't plan to return to that machine. I would even include things such as back doors. Even if you're pretty sure that you're not going to need back into that machine, clear those off as well. Just make sure that you don't increase the chances of getting caught. Now, there's a utility called Eraser, which I like quite a lot. You can get this from sourceforge.net, like a lot of good utilities here. And the thing I like about SourceForge, by the way, is that I've never seen a file that's come from SourceForge with a virus in it. So I'm pretty sure they check them all. In any case, what you do with this tool is you can have it erase empty space on the hard disk every now and then on a scheduled basis, and it can do so using very secure overwrite procedures. And the reason why it's important to override it as opposed to just hitting the delete key and deleting the files is because if somebody is suspicious of some activity on that computer, they can still go through, and there's utilities they can use to find out files that have been deleted, because when you delete the file, as you may know, it really doesn't delete the data. It just removes the pointer to that file. And then there's utilities you can use to recover that data anyway. And in fact, you can even recover files that have been overwritten. Now, that's not supposed to be able to be done, but there are a lot of utilities out there right now that are pretty hot with that. OnTrack.com, for example, is a company that makes data recovery products, some of which can be very expensive if you have to get the really good stuff, but it can recover just about anything. So on the positive side of things, if you do need to recover some data that was even accidentally deleted just in normal administration or something, ontrack.com, you can get some data recovery tools there that are absolutely outstanding, even for data that's been physically damaged. In fact, if I remember right, ontrack.com recovered a lot of data from the shuttle disaster. So they were able to recover data even from that kind of a disaster. But in any case, in other situations, when you do need to erase the data, you can do so. For example, here I've got a log file from Nmap. I just drag that into this window here, and then I go to Task and Run All, and it's going to permanently erase this data. You sure you want to continue? Yes. Now, can I guarantee that this could not be recovered by OnTrack's data recovery utility? I don't know if it could or not, quite honestly. But this would severely limit the ability to recover, and then someone might have to get some expensive tools in order to be able to recover that data. Now, other things to keep in mind here is if you go to the preferences, if you go to erasing, this identifies which way you want to erase that data. These are all just different methods with different advantages or disadvantages. They might say this one, well, that one's only going to make one pass against the data, so that must not be very good. Yeah, but it erases, it erases by overriding it with pseudo-random data. And there's also some United States Department of Defense methods that are in use as well, so really good information there. Cluster tip area is important because in order to reconstruct a file, the cluster tip is kind of the starting point, and that's what allows you to chain the file from one place to the next. So keep that in mind. And also alternate data streams, which we've talked about before, using NTFS file systems. And then there's unused disk space. You can also erase unused disk space, as I mentioned before, and you can schedule that for specific drives, whichever drives you want to do that with. And then you can also go to sourceforge.net once again for another utility for Linux. This utility is just called wipe, and it also has multiple overwrites of the disk space where that data is. So another good utility. Now, along these similar lines to working with these files, sometimes you really do want to leave a file behind, but it might be a replacement file. For example, in Linux, maybe you replace, the ls command, which we usually use to, look at files in a directory, for example. Well, you might have replaced that with your own version of ls that also has some malicious content, or maybe it's got a keystroke logger embedded within it or something like that, and as a result, it's a different size, a different file size than the default ls that comes with your installation of Linux. Well, that might raise suspicion. So what you could do is to use a utility from somebody called the Holy Father. This is a hacker guy, and it will fool the file system into thinking that that file is actually a different size. Another thing you could do is maybe there's not a file here that you've deleted and you want to trick the system into thinking that that file actually is still there. Well, what I could do is to just create a file name of my choosing. Maybe I'll just call it, I don't know, calc.exe, calc.exe, and maybe I want to make that, let's make it, 20 kilobytes. Okay, so we'll create the file, and then guess what? Now we've got an application here called calc.exe. There's the file. You can see that in my status bar area that it reports it as 20 kilobytes in size. Now, anybody that's reasonably skilled in forensics will be able to identify that this is not the actual file, but at least on a glance, it looks like the right file, and it will take a little bit more time for someone to figure out what really went wrong on this machine if you've hacked into it. Well, we talked about erasing our tracks in this nugget. One of the things we wanted to be able to do is to figure out how Snort works. I mean, you'll need to be able to both use it to protect your own networks as an IDS solution, as well as figure out how it works so that you can work your way around other people's IDS solutions, such as Snort. We used IDS Center as well, which is a great way to configure Snort, because otherwise Snort is a command line utility. IDS Center puts a graphical user interface on it for us. We also took a look at clearing the logs. Remember, that's going to be very important because those logs point a finger right at you. So you got to make sure that there's nothing pointing back to you to potentially incriminate you. And then we also want to make sure that we clear off any of the files that we've left behind. Might be log files left behind by utilities that we've run, or could be hackers' utilities that we've left behind. So be sure you clear all of those off as well. And I showed you a couple of utilities in both Linux and in Windows that you can use to permanently delete those files. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.